What's going on, guys? Bingo here. I'm with the Duel Factory for another episode of X2 Drop, our Yu-Gi-Oh podcast we do for the most part every week. If you take out those 3 months where we didn't do it, and pick a topic and discuss it. And this week, Joe picked up on something when he was watching Yu-Gi-Oh streams and videos that the term mid-range, when it's talking about a Yu-Gi-Oh deck, has been popping up more and more. And in my experience, the Yu-Gi-Oh community doesn't like to, like other trading card games, assign a tag to a type of strategy. So traditionally, you have like aggro, control, mid-range, like hyper aggro, and there's a couple more, but those are the basics, right? And he picked up on a couple of streams that the term mid-range has been popping up. So I want to talk about these terms in the context of Yu-Gi-Oh, why they work, why sometimes they don't work, and some examples of them in the past. So one, Joe, who's like, how has this been coming up?
So in terms of the actual term itself, the place I've been seeing it the most is PAX streams, and then another guy I watch, Yu-GiOh Paisano. They talk, whenever they do like their discussions and stuff like that, they're always talking about like what's combo, what's stun, and then mid-range, and they talk about a lot of mid-range because that's what they like to play when they're not playing meta-defining decks. And they go on for hours and hours, and there's actually quite a few decks that actually fit the bill. So I just thought it'd be an interesting topic to see what everyone's like definition of mid-range.
Yeah, so I think that's the next logical step is in our discussion we're about to have, what is the definition of mid-range?
So to me, like a mid-range deck, when I think of one anyway, is any deck that has like dedicated like 1 to 2 card combos that don't necessarily like end on like a huge board, but they like accomplish one specific goal like every single turn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like the goal isn't to put your opponent under an oppressive board, but the goal is to be able to play every single turn. Is what I think a mid-range deck is.
Yeah, and that's the turn one play. But when you're looking at it in the long sense of the game, right? You want to be able to play every single turn, and you want to be able to put some pressure on at some point. So it's not a dedicated control deck where these decks like Guru and Geist, given less than optimal circumstances, can't turn up the heat and like end the game, right? A mid-range deck usually can control the board a little bit, put a little bit of pressure on, and then when needed to, it can put a little bit of offensive pressure on, right? It's not full wombo combo, I'm going to OTK my opponent every game, but it has elements of the control strategy and the aggro strategy, right?
Yeah.
So what decks have they been talking about in this current format that bring this term to light?
So current deck format, especially now that we have Phantom Rage, really, I think a really, really good example of it right now is honestly the Zodiac strategy, right? So the deck itself is literally all just a 1-card combo. 1 Zoo card lets you play every single turn. But when you're doing that, those Zoo cards can do more than just, say, establish a Dryden, right? Like, if once you get past, like, turn 1, turn 2, any Zoo monster that you draw into, or even that, like, if a Dryden survives on your side of the turn, right? You can turn the Dryden into a Chalky-9. The Chalky-9 can bring back a monster, and then you can keep doing your plays to put, like, a Mega Clops on the board, right? It can do more than just one thing throughout the game. And it's one of those decks that it also splashes well with other engines, so you can put more pressure on the board, or you can change your game style as you're playing.
Okay, so this isn't the first time this term falls in the line in the Yu-Gi-Oh's history, right? It's just ignorant to think that. It's just, like I said, the Yu-Gi-Oh community usually likes to talk about strategies as just what they are, right? You had your Shadal Invoked couple formats ago. You had like Pure Zoo back in the day. Salamangreat. Like Salamangreat is like the definition of a mid-range deck, right?
Oh, it does perfect definition.
Yeah,
range deck.
If you had to put that term as an example, on a deck, it's Salamangreat. It's because it does the same thing every single turn one. It can definitely turn up the heat once they grind out the resources and kill your opponent. It can control the board. It does like everything well, nothing perfect. And
for sure.
And when Salad was the best deck, like no one was calling it a mid-range deck. It's Salamangreat. Why I don't know, but we wanted to take. Oh, go ahead.
The best. You're exactly right. Like they were just calling it the best deck, but if you think of its like key principles of what it does, it is by definition a mid-range deck.
Yeah, and we wanted to take a look at some of the other decks in the recent history. We're not going to go back too far. We'll probably go back to 2014 because Joe loves that format, and just try to pick out some strategies that fit this bill. And we're gonna struggle with some because starting off with one of my favorite decks, if not my favorite deck, Sky Striker, is really, really difficult to put in any of these three categories because
it's an anomaly, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you look at like the pure version of it, like it doesn't have a dedicated 1 or 2 card combo. Like we can make the joke that Engage is full striker combo, but I mean, it doesn't like want to like do a specific thing every single turn. Like you're just playing the game and grinding your opponent out. If you think about it, toward like the core of a striker deck.
Yeah, and we were talking about it a little before the podcast. It doesn't fit entirely into control because it has so many tools at its disposal that it easily can. Like, how many times have you been at 8K turn 3 against a striker player and they're just like Shark Cannon, Widow Anchor, drones, and like you're dead.
And you're just dead.
Yeah, so it doesn't really like control. I'm thinking Paleo Frogs. I'm thinking Guru Control, like barriers. Thunder King Ryo Stun, like barrier statue stun. Like I guess control and stun are, you could argue, are different, but we're gonna keep it simple. We're gonna try to keep the three things in mind: aggro, control, and mid range, right?
Oh yeah. For
So
sure.
like,
another deck. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so you can't always fit everything in the box, right? Because Striker wasn't. I would say it was the best deck of the format, but it was around for a year, right? So it went through dozens of iterations on like the tech cards, the play style, the ban list hits. Like it changed its play style, but never enough to pin it inside one of these three boxes. Because you had your, what was it, the Utopia double combo? Like you could argue that's aggro. You had a whole bunch of other versions of the deck, and it just doesn't fit perfectly in one of these spots. So
Sky Striker, it's weird, right? Because like I think the engine itself by far the best engine Yu-Gi-Oh's seen in a long time, right? Like you saw other decks play it. Like there was a Trickstar Striker deck, there was the Orcust Striker deck, which was one of the best decks.
Orcust Striker was.
You could play the Sky Striker engine and the Goki deck that gave you more warriors and stuff like that. But the deck itself was never like. I think there were like parts of the format where the deck was like either like the best deck or it was the best deck to play against the best deck. Like when Salamangreat like first came out and people thought that was the best strategy to play, and then like Striker just played against it perfectly because like it was good at taking cards away like Sunlight Wolf and stuff like that. But
yeah, and I threw that in there. It wasn't like the best deck of the format because in a tier 0 or a tier 0.5 format, the best decks warp everything, right? And we're going to get to talking about Nekroz, I'm sure, by the end of the podcast, and that should be a pretty interesting discussion because it was Nekroz or beat Nekroz, right? And it completely shifted not only how other decks played, but how Nekroz played itself. Because if you just look at Nekroz now, obviously, versus then, night and day, for a variety of different reasons. But we'll get to that later.
So one deck that I actually I find like super interesting to define by like this term, and Aaron's probably going to stab me over this one, but that's okay. But if you think about it, to its core principle, Orcust is a deck that you could honestly consider a mid-range deck. But it's one of those decks. It's kind of like Nekroz, right? Where like the strategy at first was completely different than what it is today. I think it's like a really good example to explain.
Yeah, I mean, before what was it, before Harp's ban, like I would say, I guess it depends on which version of the deck you look at, right? There was definitely at points where Orcust was fit the bill perfectly for mid range, right? You're just establishing your graveyard, you're setting up a decent board turn one, you're grinding out your opponent's resources, and then one turn they're just dead.
Yeah, that's basically what Orcust did. Like that's why I think it's like one of the best definitions of mid range. But then you look at its like very first iterations, and then you look at like its end result now, right? So like the first iterations of it, I think where you saw the most success at first was like at Exception, when he was playing the go a second attack deck.
Yeah, attack
deck. Trying to kill you. Yeah, attack deck. There you go. But like you're just trying to kill your opponent, right? Like the deck only did one thing. But then you go to another event where I can't think of his name, the best VA player of all time. But it'll come back to me here in a second. But then he played it as an Azathoth combo deck, right? Where like the deck again only did one thing, but you also have to keep in the back of the mind that it could also make Boral Sword and kill you. Then you give it a new set of cards. You gave it Dengirsu. And then that's where it like fully became like an actual mid-range deck, because now the deck could lock you out with Azathoth. It could do regular Orcust things, and it was playing the PK engine in it as well. And then it could kill you at any point. So like it could do everything, but it wasn't the best at doing everything. And then like you took Harp away, now you take some of the power away, so now you have to play the deck like a dedicated combo deck now, at least from now what I can see. Yeah, but I think it's one of those decks that not only fits the definition the best, but it also evolved out of something different, is another way to explain.
Yeah, and that's nothing's gonna, for the most part, nothing's gonna stay inside a box. Strategies have to evolve because of natural power creep and the ban list check in the format. So in order for an older deck to adapt, and we were talking about this a little bit before, the best mid-range decks of a format a year ago are most likely going to adapt into hyper aggro decks or very control focused decks, because that's just, you have to have a very polarizing strategy in order for a older deck to stand up to the current format. And we see that a lot with all these cool YouTube videos, like after a new card releases that kind of breaks, quote unquote, an old deck, and it just opens up this insane combo string. And that's like the best way to play an old strategy, because it either has to just completely wall your opponent, with whether or not it's like VFD plus like 2 negates, or just OTK in your opponent through any board. Like that's most of the time mid-range decks don't stand up because they lose something, power creep happens, or there's just better decks to play, right? And you have to gear towards control or aggro. So I know you mentioned the Invoke strategy as like a classic mid-range, I guess, engine, because no one plays pure Invoked, right?
Well, yeah, it's 100%. You could define that as mid-range, because think about it. Because Alistair can do multiple things, right? Like it's a one-card engine, but as when I was sitting there, I remember what YC was it, Atlanta, or it was Atlanta. Me and Aldo were sitting there talking about it. We were talking about just how crazy of a card Alistair was, right? Because like going second, it could crack a board by itself. But at the same time, it can also establish things like you'll see it more in like Invoke Dogmatica decks. Because surprisingly, depending on what you do, those decks can live and die by getting Nibirued. But Alistair is a way to play through it, because you can establish a Mechaba under 5 summons. I think Mechaba is like your 4th summon or something like that, right? So you could do things like that, and then now you have a way to play through other stuff. So now like your Dogmatica cards can resolve safely. If you're going up against a combo deck that's making a board, you can summon the Alistair and they either have to deal with it or it summons a monster that can attack everything like Percatria, right? Like it does multiple things.
Yeah. So what looking back at your favorite format, right? 2014 format.
Great time. Yeah.
So what, obviously, just to refresh some listeners' memories, what were the decks, the top? I know there was like 10 decks you could play, but like if you had to pick like the top 3 or 4, what were they?
If you got to pick like the top ones that you had at the time, if I had to think about it, it would probably be Sylvan was one of them. It was like one of the true combo decks of the format. Infernity was, I think, by far was just the best deck. There just wasn't enough like pilots for it. You got to give it to Hat, and then a lot of people didn't agree with this one, but I think Yu-GiOh also one of I think those would have been like the best 4 decks.
Okay, so Hat and Yu-GiOh, you would classify them as what?
So Gears were like a 1-card engine, but like they didn't have like a dedicated combo. Like you could do the turn 1 combo with Arsenal Accelerator that ended you on like Gear Gigant X and made Gear Gigant X a guaranteed floater. But that's more of like a control strategy because you were leaning on your back row carding things that with Gear Gigant X and your Gear cards to get anything, right?
Yeah.
The Hat deck, you had 3 different engines going on in that deck, and they weren't like combo pieces. They were just like turn 1 starters, and they were all turn 1 starters. Like going second, establishing like a fire or an ice hand to like start cracking your opponent's board, right? Or summoning a Trap Tricks Murmillo, going first, establishing like a bottomless trap hole or a trap hole nightmare. If you're like post sided, you could play things like acid trap hole for Yu-GiOh, or deep dark trap hole for decks like what's the one Dragon Rulers, or any deck that played one like that was really good against those. Like they leaned on their back row cards, not like actual combos those decks could do.
Yeah. So I would put those in the control strategy because they're looking to establish slow, grindy advantage and just beat out their opponent with their back row, right? Until they eventually whittle down the life points. Like that's secondary.
But then you have the other 2 decks of like the top that I said, and then there was like Sylvan, and then there was Infernity, and those are definitely aggro. Like they only want to do one thing; they just want a combo.
Yeah.
And like the Infernity, the strategy was simple: you open 5, or in this case, you open 6 because you could still draw 2 at that Nationals, or you draw going first at that Nationals, and you end on a lever. It's like that was the strategy.
Yeah.
And then Sylvan, or then like take that strategy to the extreme, but they're still ending on big monsters, and like it was just decks to play Soul Charge in.
Yeah, but yeah, Sylvan, it depended on a lot of like your combo strings depended on a lot, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you had to look at the other decks available and find out one that fit the bill of mid range, what would it be?
If I had to think of like a deck or 2 that would like actually fulfill the mid range strategy, one of the popular strategy, Mythic Ruler, I think is one that could actually fit the strategy. It didn't have like a dedicated like combo it did, but like 1 or 2 cards established you. And you wanted to do the same thing every turn, right? You just wanted to keep summoning rulers to outgrind your opponent. So I think that would be like the best definition of a mid-range deck for like 2014. Another one would be like your Lightsworn decks that you had. I think that deck was not as good as people thought it was, personally. But the idea is your XYZ plays played through your opponent's like back row cards and stuff like that. And then your big boss monsters finish the game. Like you would like clear your opponent's boards with like Draco Sax, Big Eyes, Honor Arcs, X Titan Knights, Synchro Monsters, and then you would summon like a JD or a Light Ray Diablos, and that would finish out the game. So I think those are like the best definitions of mid-range for 2014.
Okay. And obviously, you said Ravine Rulers, right? So take it back.
We didn't have Ravine for 2014. They banned it.
So just take Rulers, for example, right? How long were rulers relevant? Like a year, maybe.
Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy came out 2013 Nationals, and we still had a Mythic Ruler deck top in 2014 Nationals, so it was over a year.
Yeah, so over a year. How many iterations did Dragon Rulers go through?
All right, so now if I think about
lot.
it, so you might want to get a notepad out.
Yeah, so that was my point, right? It's a lot.
Yeah.
When it was first played, you let's say after you got the babies, right? So you had all the big boss monsters, you had the babies. How did the deck play?
That's 100% a combo deck.
Yeah, it's combo. Establish XYZs, kill your opponent, right?
Oh yeah, it was the first time you are actually seeing like big monsters summon consistently every single turn.
And then they slowly started taking hits from the ban list, right? And then there was that giant one, and they were still relevant. They just could not play that aggressively anymore, right?
No, it took like 1 or 2 turns to actually like establish anything.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen in Yu-Gi-Oh, where ban lists will come out and check a deck, and then if it was a full aggro deck, it'll slow down and it'll still be sort of that mid-range deck until it's basically power crept out. And then it becomes irrelevant, honestly. But
more or less, yeah. That's the best way to describe it. That deck was crazy.
So jumping to, I really wanted to get to this talking point because we had some good discussion about it. Nekroz, right? If you look at when Nekroz was the best deck, the way the cards are designed, it's obvious like they're a control strategy. But when they were the best deck, they power crept pretty much everything and warped the format around it. So it became, like you said, a combo deck. So it should fall somewhere between the mid-range and control, but because that it was the deck of the format, tier 0, and everything was out to beat it, and it played like a combo deck because it didn't have to control the board because of the mirror matches. So it's just really interesting to look at a deck in the context that it doesn't matter how it's designed, it's how it's played, right?
Yeah, bro. I still remember playing that format when we actually got like Necroz. So Necroz is crazy because of all the short prints and stuff like that. So it's like $1,200 to play. It was insane. But I remember playing it, and then like you were saying, like we were talking about earlier, like it had to play like an actual true combo deck, which was crazy because like I don't know, it was so close to being an actual tier 0 format. It was insane. Everyone was just prepared to play against Nekroz, but what the deck did was like actually insane. Because like I think what is it? Any Jew plus Kaleidoscope, and like you were just doing the play where like you were like putting like Maxis and Valkyries on top of your deck, or something like that, and then resolving a Valkyries to draw into those cards and forcing your opponent to play through that. Like that was insane.
Yeah, and like what were your other options, right?
Oh yeah, like so. This is one of those decks. Like, there's so many different things that you did. So,
Oh no, I meant other decks that you could play during that format, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So, like when you were playing, like I know that Nationals, like everyone was playing Nekroz, and I had been playing Nekroz, but I switched to playing Burning Abyss because to me that was the best deck to beat Nekroz if you weren't going to play Nekroz. Simply because you could play like super powerful cards against. Like we just got Crush Card Virus back. And resolving a Crush Card Virus against a Nekroz player was literally a death sentence. And it just took all their combo pieces out of their hand.
And that was when BA was playing like Anti-Spell and Fire Lake, right?
Anti-Spell, Fire Lake, Crush, the one Crush card, Mind Crush was still really good. Like there is a bunch of cards that deck could play and put it at a huge advantage. And the best part about the deck, right, is Nekroz wanted to go second in that format because it's a ritual deck. It wants the 6th card. So even if you lose a dice roll, right, you could tell if you're playing against a Nekroz player because they'll tell you to go first. And then that just puts you so far ahead of them, especially if they don't open a hand trap. Because, like, a Nekroz deck trying to play against a BA board, which is just, like, we didn't have Beatrice yet. So you had, like, multiple Dantes plus 3 back row or something like that. That was really hard for Nekroz.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring up BA because look at how BA usually plays, right? It's like just a combo deck to establish multiple rank 3s. Like, yeah, they played trap cards, but like obviously that got phased out over the years. But were they playing a heavy trap line at that time because of the metagame?
The first builds were, and then it became the best deck, and then people were playing what were called Big Boy BA, which was like it played 30 monster cards and just heavily emphasized playing BA monsters. Because all you wanted to do was open 2 BA monsters to make a Dante. That's all you want to do every single game. And then the Nekroz deck came out, and it came back to being a trap deck, and then the format shifted, and then we got PK cards. So honestly, I think if you think of 2015, BA could honestly be one of the few decks that you could actually consider a actual true range deck, now that I think about it.
Yeah, and BA is just a deck that is traditionally pretty aggro. Like it doesn't have much elements of control. Like obviously Beatrice is a good card, but just because interaction does not equal control, it had to completely shift gears and play against the best deck, right? It had to play these trap cards so it could do a variety of different things as well as slow down the metagame because of Nekroz. So BA actually changed from this aggro deck into a mid-range deck for that time in the game's period.
It's crazy now I think about it too.
So
we had BA for so long.
Yeah, and it's just when you're looking at TCG, it has to evolve, right? We're getting close to the end of the podcast, so the game can't stay stagnant. Like as much as I want Zodiac to stay like this oppressive powerhouse, like it can't, or else the game gets stale and boring. And like it's always nice to look back with rose-tinted glasses and say, "Oh, I miss this format. I miss this format." But the game
rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, you've never heard that expression. All right. Anyways, so the game has to evolve, or else obviously they don't make any money. We get bored and we just go play other things. So unless that happens, these decks are going to stay like nothing's going to change, right? So
Zero.
These mid-range decks, I think, are very, very healthy for the format, and them being relevant shows how the format's relatively healthy. Because in a tier 0 format, there usually can't be that many mid-range. They can't be that many decks relevant. Honestly, like I'm just talking out of my ass, but get what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because like the game's always going to have like these types of decks, but like they're not always going to be the most meta relevant, and that's the idea behind them, honestly. But like you have meta relevant strategies that have to shift to that mindset, so it's ever changing. But like the definition is still the same, just what goes in the box is different.
Yeah. So if you take a step back from whatever format we're in, if you just see that it's dominated by like 2 hyper aggressive decks, like looking back at Goki format, it was like Goki or Sky Striker, right?
More or less.
Yeah, and it was just hyper aggro versus like the anomaly that Sky Striker was, which was just like a mesh of everything. That's, in my opinion, that's not a healthy format. But right now we have elements of aggro, elements of control, and a variety of mid-range decks. So I think this format is pretty healthy, even though I haven't played very much of it. I've been trying to catch up over this past week, guys. Bear with me. So
I think it's a really good format to play.
So Joe, we're at 29 minutes. You got any closing comments?
You know, I don't think I really do, but there's always that classic thing I remember, and it keeps me up at night, and I think everyone should know. But Douglas French just has no sauce.
Yeah, and we all know why after last season's finale of the podcast, right? So, guys, if you have enjoyed this video, please check us out every week, Monday. It's your 8 a.m. iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, 10 a.m. YouTube. I'm not going to dedicate like, hey, I'm going to have an episode every single week, because there is still that lack of in-person events, which is why I love playing this game so much. But I do miss it. I do want to talk about it. So check us out. If you have any topic ideas, please message us on. I got several messages on YouTube. I got one on Twitter. So if you have a topic idea, please share it. We want to hear what you guys want to hear. So let us know. And then that's all I got. Joe, anything?
Nah, just if nothing else, if like, especially like if you do like remote duels, just keep playing. It's gonna get better at some point. So that's what I got.
All right, guys. See you back here next week. Peace out.
Okay, bye.